Hello, everybody, and welcome to another conversation in our series on seeking harmony. For today, we are looking at some topics that have been top of mind in media this week, and one of them that stands out is Singapore repealing quite an old law that basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Criminalizes same-sex sexual relations. And so I think it's something that has probably been a law that we've seen over the last couple of years changing in various other countries. And recall even in one of our LGBTQ conversations where Switzerland actually had a referendum around same-sex marriage sometime last year. So I think there is a shift as more people are being more openly themselves and claiming their own power and claiming themselves. And so we believe that this is also a topic to explore, given that Singapore has repealed the law, but hasn't yet changed their constitution to incorporate more equal rights for same-sex partners and same-sex marriages. And one of the things that they are sticking to is maintaining a definition of marriage as something between a man and a woman. So yeah, I'm going to open it up to our team and see how you guys feel about what's happening in that space. I'll also share my view afterwards, but I'd like to just get your sense of how you feel about what's happening there.
Well, it definitely feels different than what was happening before. It feels like this is a choice of acceptance, and that people are becoming more accepting of the attitudes toward, like, accepting attitudes are increasing toward LGBTQ people, particularly among the younger generation. So I believe it does indicate change. But at the same time, this is happening, like Granville was saying, literally in Singapore, the president, or the prime minister, was proposing that the Constitution be changed, like be amended to define marriages between a man and a woman. So that would basically mean that it would be more difficult to change that in the future, because you would have to change the Constitution, and that's more difficult than just like changing a law that is separate from the Constitution. So yeah, to me, it seems like very, very little is changing, although I feel there's probably more of a climate of repression, or fear. Like, if there's literally a law against your sexual activity with the people, like same-sex sexual activity, yeah, that would be like, I would probably feel a bit nervous, to have that in place. But I read that law wasn't really enforced very much. It was mainly just on the books from colonial times, and it wasn't removed, which feels like it was expressing disapproval and maybe an effort to kind of like keep homosexuality like out of sight, right? Because someone might be like nervous perhaps about expressing publicly that, that they are homosexual. But that this law was still kept in place for that purpose, perhaps. But now, it's being called to be repealed. So I feel like it is progress, but there's also this element of like still trying to, hold on to that sense of like a separateness. Yeah. So that's how I feel about it. Yeah.
I feel like he's kind of just trying to please people, like please everyone, because it's like there's this So we're repealing the law that outlaws, same-sex sexual relationships, but then there's still the law that only a man and woman can be married. So he's just trying to please both sides. I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
I agree with Isaiah. I feel like, yeah, I don't know. It wasn't enforced as a law for quite a few years, but I feel like seeing the response of like the local LGBTQ movements, it was quite a relief that they had this law, and that it was a step in the right direction. And at the same time, having the government, reinforce in their speech that marriage should be between a man and a woman, it feels a little bit like, yeah, I don't know. Do you remember when we talked about, the American prisoners in Russia? It was a little bit like that, like just a political move, maybe, more than an actual belief in progression of the LGBTQ. I don't mean like to demean the victory that it is to decriminalize sexual relationships between homosexuals, but it does feel a little bit bittersweet. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think all of you've touched on something that's important. And that's the sense of almost a half-pregnant movement. Like what are they actually trying to achieve here? Like you can't be half pregnant. You can't give on one hand as a benefit and then take away on the other hand and hope that people are not seeing that both your hands are doing different things and supporting different directions. It kind of feels to me just a little bit too calculated. So I feel like there's a calculated sense in the fact that, oh, let's allow these people to live their lives, but at the same time, they will not quite be fully recognized in the law, and we're going to change it so that it makes it even more difficult down the road for them to be fully recognized in the law. So appease the LGBTQ contingent of our population, but at the same time, also appease the conservative component of our population, or the traditional or religious component of our population. So it doesn't feel like there's a real change happening. And one of the things that stood out for me when I read the article was, like, I traveled to Singapore in 2013, and I read the article and I was like, I didn't even realize that they had a law against same-sex sexual relations. And, just being in the country and not realizing that just tells you that there was no effect to it in the first place. So what is the purpose of shifting it now and not shifting it completely? Because it's incomplete until it's enshrined in the law, until it's enshrined in the Constitution for equal recognition and equal rights. So it makes it I feel like it makes it much more complicated, but it also waters down a win for the LGBTQ community within Singapore. It doesn't give them the liberation that should be enshrined in their constitution.
Yeah, and I like the point too that you made about it could just be for public relations, like for tourism. Do you still feel that way intuitively?
Intuitively, I do. Like for me, that there's a sense that it's calculated, and I feel like it's literally to open up the tourist market. Because if more LGBTQ people realize that, okay, it's actually safe for me to go to those countries with my partner, and we are not going to be targets of a draconian law, I would want to spend my money doing that kind of thing. I would want to travel the world and see the world and be comfortable enough to know that I will be as free as possible in that country. So the fact that they don't recognize my marriage is immaterial because it will be recognized in my home country kind of thing. But I will be comfortable to travel there knowing that I'm safe to travel there and that it's okay. So I feel like it's a little bit of a calculated move, and it may not just be related to tourism. I think it's probably a little bit of what Isaiah shared in trying to kind of appease many people without making real change.
That's interesting because Singapore relies on immigration, not just with tourism, but with like short-term and long-term immigration from many, many, many countries and ethnic groups. So yeah, maybe it's a way to appease people like inside the country, but also say like, hey, we're a welcoming nations, because for the past 10 years, we've been trying to develop in a way that says like, hey, we're open to the world. And I felt like this development was kind of over. Like they were like saying like, okay, we're stable, we don't care about it anymore. But maybe they still do, you know, they still want to maintain and or grow their place on a global scale. So yeah, that could be it as well. That could be a lot of things, basically.
Yeah, and then one of the things that was shared with us during our trip to Singapore was that there is a great import of skills in the country, into the country. So one of the things that they do is that their graduates don't actually go into multinationals. They actually start off working for the government. Their graduates from universities are actually employed into government departments before they're generally allowed to work in the private sector. So there's obviously there's a great demand for skills in Singapore. That means that you kind of need to open your borders to allowing more people in. And I feel like this is a move in that direction. And for me, it's like, as you said, Doreen, it could be a number of things, but it feels very calculated. And I think it's something that was touched on in a previous conversation, is like there's always a purpose to these moves. You know, there's always an intention behind it that's not always commonly understood or known.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe that move is like being seen as a progressive country in that state.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's cool. I just wanted to say, thanks for sharing that too, because that adds depth to it too, you know, that I didn't know that Singapore had to like import a lot of like people, well, a lot of skills, you know, and for the country and stuff like that, particularly for the government. So it's cool to know that, because it adds an element to, you know, the intention behind why they would do that. Yeah.
Yep. And they do. I mean, let's just also remember that Singapore also has a Grand Prix that's very well publicized.
They have a what?
Pardon?
They have what that's well publicized?
a Grand Prix. That's also not, that's actually not very well publicized, but it's a massive tourist attraction in their country. And so, I mean, they literally close down city streets to run their Grand Prix. It's not like on a circuit and things like that. It's actually in the city.
Oh, it's like a car race?
Yeah, like a Grand Prix, like literally like Formula One kind of thing.
Oh, okay. I heard you, but I just didn't believe it because I was like, I couldn't like reconcile those two things, like a really densely populated city and like a Grand Prix. It didn't fit.
They literally
Cool.
closed down one of their main roads.
Oh.
It's like literally a 6-lane road in one direction. They literally close down those roads and have this Formula One type race in the city center.
Cool.
Cool, yeah. So with that, I think we've come like I feel complete with the Singapore component of our conversation. So yeah, what next would you guys like to explore as a topic?
Well, our next big topic was the mounting tensions between Serbia and Kosovo. We had a bit of news about that last week or 2 weeks ago. I don't remember. And now Serbia seems to be moving on to maybe like a discourse of like, we will protect our citizens no matter what. And Albanians in Kosovo are kind of trying to attack us. So yeah, and it's very, very complex as a situation. Like I'm only barely scraping the surface there. And it has links to the history of this region, the war that took place 20 years ago, and also the fact that Serbia has Russia as an ally. So yeah, Sage, would you like to fill us in on the situation a little bit more?
Yeah, just briefly and as simply as possible, because yeah, that history has been really complex, you know, and it could be told that way, but I would say to give some background on it, like last I think in July initially, or just the past couple months, the president of Kosovo, so Kosovo being like, it used to be like a province of Serbia, and it's the southernmost province down in Serbia. And I'm explaining this more for like an audience who like may not be aware, because like a lot of Americans, for example, like don't get a lot of thorough education in that history. So that southern province of Serbia is like a large majority Albanian, and ethnicity of the people there is Albanian. And there's a smaller minority of Serbians. And there's also kind of a religious difference in the Serbians being mainly Christian, Orthodox Christian, and the Albanians being Muslim mainly. And so, you know, there's historically been like disputes about who should live there in that land. And an element of the, you know, some Serbians recognizing that land to be like theirs and have some like sacredness to them. And, you know, the Kosovan Albanians still feeling like they want to live there as well. So, yeah, so Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008. It's not been recognized by Serbia through that whole time. And the background was kind of like the history of there being like persecution of the Albanians in Kosovo back when in the 90s and earlier, you know. by the Serbian government. So there's a feeling among the Albanian Kosovans probably that they feel like we want to like control our own destiny. We don't want to be subject to the laws of a potentially discriminatory government. So we would like to be an independent country. So all that being said, so more recently, the president of Kosovo and their parliament was saying, we would like for, there's some ethnic Serbians in the north of Kosovo that are still using Serbian identification documents and Serbian license plates on their cars. And so they said, you know, we are requiring you to switch your documentation to being Kosovan and your license plates to being Kosovo license plates. So yeah, and that was causing some like discontent. There were protests where some people on the behalf of Serbians were like blocking roads near the international border checkpoints, you know, and all of that. And so, and I imagine like the police of Kosovo were kind of trying to disperse them and all of that. So it's just one of those situations that is tense, and there's like a lot of history to it. But I feel like it's very simple, and it kind of comes down to like a feeling of like a grudge, you know, and unforgiveness there kind of. So that is my background of it so far as I know. Yeah.
I think you touch really well on the sensitivity and like hurt feelings that are there for people in this region. And yeah, I just want to add that we could talk about this tonight because like Andy, who is part of our community, was born in Kosovo, and his twin flame Nikki is Albanian, and they gave us a lot of information on the history of what is there. And so in 1999, if I remember correctly, like the United Nations like placed security there. So at the border, there's still a security so as to you know, keep the peace in the region. And also Andy said that Kosovan people want Serbians to recognize that there was a genocide there because they killed a lot of people during the war and hurt a lot of people, and people are still traumatized from the remembrance of the war there. And so, and now today, like, I don't know, the first time we talked about it in the chat, like, I feel we were all surprised about like Serbia and its discourse. It was like, why does Serbia want to do that now? Why are they telling that Albanian gangs are trying to attack their population, you know, and that they will retaliate? And it was like so weird. And basically, it felt like because Serbia is close to Russia, they were trying to do the same thing, and or Putin was trying to, you know, place bombs in the region. And basically, if the situation gets even more unstable there, like it could generate a conflict on a European scale or even a world scale, like world large scale. So yeah, it feels like, yeah, once again, we have like governments or like countries trying to maybe abuse the stability of regions and take from people and threaten what we know as peace there. And that's a feeling that I got basically because it was so surprising to think that, like, why would Serbia do that now, you know? And that's just my conclusion and how I felt about it. But yeah, I'm curious to know, like, what do you guys feel about the situation?
So like if I feel into it, something that stands out to me is that it feels like a drive for destabilization. So we see the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we see the China-Taiwan conflict, and now the Serbia-Kosovo conflict, and it all feels like it's fueling a drive. It's fueling destabilization, and it's fueling it's almost creating the landscape to say we need a different type of leadership for the world as opposed to what we're seeing right now. It's kind of, it almost feels like it's paving the way. You know, like we're laying brick by bricks, just showing how unstable things are becoming and why there's a need to start contributing to a world governing body, for instance. You know, so it's like I think we need to not only look at the surface and look at what's currently happening, but actually what could this fuel in the future? What would it drive towards? Because none of this is, unfortunately, without consequence.
Mhm.
And what would that consequence be if we continue to see economies destabilized, if we continue to see nations being destabilized, if we're seeing households destabilized? And that's what's come through COVID, and maybe even before that, even though we didn't see it on the scale of COVID. So the long-term consequence of all of these things looks basically like Warcraft. You know, the game Warcraft. It's kind of like it's not Warcraft. What is it, Minecraft or whatever? You know, just kind of really shifting things around and making it unstable and allowing a case to be built for a different type of leadership at a world level.
Yeah, I think that you got it spot on. It's about more than just the specific dispute between Serbia and Kosovo. It's about what is the world order. And yes, it's, you know, because if you feel into it and look at the bigger level, you know, as Jeff pointed this out, you know, at the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war, and you know, he and Shaleia have continued to comment about this, that you know, Russia and China and Iran and some other countries, they are desiring a world order that's kind of the older style of like pillage and plunder and might is right, and we don't have agreements, international agreements that respect countries regardless of their size and their military power, right? And resources. We just might is right. So whoever can invade a country and take it over and make it into a vassal state, we're going to do it. And that's the old world order. And I think it's seen as a way, like we were saying with China last week, it's seen as a way to get ahead without playing fairly and without being honest and without putting in an honest day's work. Because some countries saw themselves as like, economically we're behind, you know, the Western countries, which that's not actually true. Like, you're not behind, you're just, your journey is your journey. You don't have to like compare yourself in such a way, but you could say it's less advantageous in the world. And they would have to, be part of that system, economic system, and like build themselves up to a higher level of abundance and wealth there, and power. And this is an effort to bypass that. And this is an effort to bring back the old world order and make that the new world order. And I think that's what it's about. And Serbia, I think, is participating in that, because notice that, the president of Serbia was saying, he literally said, if NATO will not intervene to protect Serbians, then we will. And part of me, what I feel from that is he's kind of bypassing, like he's making it look like NATO doesn't want to do anything, but NATO is not going to act on a dime with this, because this is very sensitive and complex, and there's a history there. NATO literally bombed Serbia in the late 90s, and that's what helped the conflict end. So they're not just going to like go in there with blunt force, right away. But the Serbian president is using this rhetoric to make it seem like NATO is doing nothing while Serbians are being persecuted. And, it's just like, while I'm sure that it's not a pleasant situation for anyone there, including ethnic Serbians, it seems like this is an effort to, to bypass the international agreements. And so, yeah. And I feel like
something that's probably just a thing to note is, if you say we have to act because nobody else would, you're almost justifying your aggressor behavior. So it's like it literally, again, groundwork. It's kind of propaganda, laying foundation to build on at the time when the decision, if and when a decision is made to act more aggressively. This is literally paving the way towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Russia, I think Russia is more of like, the Soviet Union / Russia was like the master of that. Not that that is like a desirable skill, or the world's next marketable skill, but they, you know what I mean? But it's just propaganda, also, yeah. Just like lay the groundwork, repeat it again and again and again. Propaganda, let's let's establish the case for this. If we say it enough, people will believe it. And yeah, it's just yeah.
Right. I didn't want to draw too many comparisons there, but as soon as I read about this story, I was like, well, isn't this familiar? Because like, how did World War I begin? Like, someone from Bulgaria, or should someone for Serbia, or the other way around? I'm not sure.
So it was a Serbian national who
shot someone from the Hungarian kingdom.
Yeah.
And there were already so many tensions in Europe, but it just like took into like World War I, because one called out his allies and the other one called out his allies, and so on and so forth, and it started like the world conflict. But before that, there were already like maybe 5 decades of trying to create tensions with neighbors and propaganda, and trying to expand one's kingdom, and try to paint your neighbor as a criminal. In World War II, he was a Nazi, and it was like, yeah, it's weird because it's like the same thing. And maybe like world wars were like installed in like old world energy, but it feels like it's exactly the strategies of the leaders like that. They want to have another organization of the world. It's like creating propaganda and tensions, and potentially one tensions will make the world go into war, basically. How many times have we heard people say like, oh, this is World War III, we're scared like for China or North Korea or Russia, and maybe now experts saying that for Serbia. And hopefully we have now come to like a world structure, an organization that can contain these kinds of attacks, so it doesn't amount to a world war, but like the crises that are going to be created from that are going to be especially hard and painful anyway, you know. And so yeah, in a sense, it's like trying to create like tensions or playing on pent-up traumas and emotions and memories to try to create the world that you want with power. And it's definitely bypassing, and it's kind of disgusting in my opinion, but like it's how they want to play. And as soon as we realize that it's how they want to play, the sooner we realize that it's how they want to play, the sooner we'll understand that we don't want the same world organization, but we have to try and contain these kinds of attacks, because like we can't say, oh, like it's only one leader, we'll be okay. No, it's like a handful of leaders trying to create problems, and we mustn't get involved in their false narrative, and really take a step back and say like, okay, are Serbians really in danger there? And if so, why? Does it need the interventions of NATO? What's the history there? Are Kosovans not more in need than Serbians, and why? You know, and like really asking these questions will help us to understand like the world we live in, and do what's right, protect the right people, not protect the right people, but you know, stand with what is right.
Yeah.
So something that concerns me is that there has been a drive within the European Union to kind of mitigate, or to, you know, like to oversee these peace talks, or to oversee the resolution of this conflict from a European Union point of view, that has not quite succeeded. And now you have the president of a country who's part of the EU saying, well, actually, NATO, do something. And you kind of have to wonder how effective the EU is, and if NATO is needing to be called in. Is it that NATO is, it's because NATO are really, from a military point of view, so much more advanced, from a political diplomacy point of view, so much more advanced? What is the intention of calling in another regulatory body when it's not being resolved by the EU? And what is the purpose? You know, like, what is the purpose? What is the point? What is the intention? What are they actually trying to achieve? It's literally, you know, like literally the same thing as Zelensky saying, help us, but he's also, it's the same thing as him saying help us and not doing something, versus him saying help us, but also being right there in the forefront saying, we won't stand for it. Like, you know, like what happens to the boy that cries wolf when the wolf is really only in his mind?
Is Serbia part of the EU though? I feel like,
I don't know if they're part of the EU, but I know that there's been talks, and the EU has been trying to help them or assist them in resolving the conflict. And I'm saying, what if EU wasn't effective, what will make NATO more effective?
Oh yeah, or I think, or
They're
vice-
in EU, like they've been in EU since 2010,
Oh,
Here we go.
along with Croatia, I think, and other ex-Yugoslavia countries, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they're in the EU.
Okay, Nikki just posted a comment saying they're not in the EU.
They're not in EU.
no,
Okay.
I'm looking it up and I'm seeing that they're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense because like the situation, like not just with Kosovo, but with like Croatia and Bosnia is also very tense.
Mm.
So that would make sense that if they have not resolved these things, like they would not be in EU.
Yeah.
But yeah, as
It-
for the meeting, I'm not sure of what the design was for it, but I feel like showing that Kosovo was invited was an act of saying like Europe won't stand for aggression and whatever the history was, Kosovans are in their rightful place, I guess.
Yeah, and the other thing that stands out to me was in the 90s, Serbia was quite an aggressive country going to war. Was it with Yugoslavia or which country were they at war with?
They were
So-
in Yugoslavia, but fighting their neighbors in Yugoslavia because they weren't very much friends, and that's how Yugoslavia was
Broken down.
collapsed.
They wanted to rebel, so it was that. Yeah, the president of Serbia, Milosevic, was, and the government of Serbia was trying to like, basically like limit the rights of the Albanians in Kosovo, and so the Kosovans, in various ways, including through the Kosovan Liberation Army, rose up and were like engaging in a very, sometimes like really violent uprising, basically. So it was like an independence movement too back then, I feel. And yeah, there was like it was genocide. It was like a continuous genocide throughout the war by the Serbian government. And there was also atrocities committed by like the KLA and, you know, like some Kosovan people as well, you know. So, but yeah, I feel like there was a lot of aggression there. And it's weird that like that wouldn't be considered because everyone knows that the Serbian government did that in the past, you know. So it seems really alarming and weird that they would say if NATO won't do something, we will intervene. The agreement was that NATO would constantly be in Kosovo and that they would be peacekeepers and ensure that Serbians and Albanians in Kosovo would be treated fairly and protected, you know. Their goal is to like not have a conflict. And so they're already there and that is their job. That's the agreement. And so it should happen, but I don't know. You know what I mean? Like the Serbian president is saying like, it's not happening fast enough. We're going to intervene. And so just to clarify, because I feel like that was a little muddy. Yeah.
You know what? This
I feel
makes
like
me
they're
feel
running a
like
pattern again. I feel like they're running a very similar pattern. It's almost a pattern in their consciousness of take what you want or appear to be protecting, but take what you want.
Right.
I-
Because like,
yeah.
because these areas too were always ethnically mixed, you know? So.
Yeah, it literally feels like fueling an energy of separation at a national level.
Yeah.
Like for as long as they don't recognize the individual sovereignty of their nationalities, there will always be a conflict.
Yeah, they're far from accepting that, but what's weird though is that for the longest time, meaning the beginning of the 21st century, all of these countries were considered as peaceful, you know, and NATO was placed there to keep that peace. And so speaking up now, especially now with like all the world tensions that we are having, it kind of feels like a strategy of saying, right, what NATO and Europe put in place didn't work, and so we want something else. It's not like, it's as if like, real or not, we're gonna say it's an attack, and real or not, we're gonna say NATO failed. So we're gonna get support from NATO detractors, and we can put our plan in place. It's what it feels like almost, you know, because like it's not just a pattern, it's like a strategy. And that's why it feels so uneasy.
It's like the art of war, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, another thing that I want to mention too about this is that, you know, how like one theme going on with this is that there's a feeling like, especially since World War I, that like the Serbians should have the nation of Serbia, and the Kosovans should have Kosovo, well, Albanians, and you know what I mean? Or the Czech Republic, the Czechs should have Czechia, Slovaks should have Slovakia. Like there's a feeling almost of like, because of ethnic tension, you know, and persecution and grudges and stuff like that, that every ethnic group should have its own domain and its own country, and that will solve all of our problems. And that is, you know, shown to be not true, because no like region of the world is like purely this ethnicity or that ethnicity, and merely having that, it's like based in like separation, you know, it's like saying we need separation to be safe, and we need separation for everyone to have rights. But that separation is an illusion, both spiritually and like literally. Like you will never have a territory like that, where, you know what I mean? Where like this territory is only for Serbians, this territory is only for Ukrainians. And Russia is using this as well, this kind of rhetoric saying, you know, Russian speakers should be in Russian territory to ensure that they're treated fairly and not persecuted. Right? So is separation the solution, and just walling off your problematic neighbors? Or is the solution like seeing our oneness and having acceptance for everyone, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Europe has experienced this pattern for centuries, and I know we look up to Europe as an example of like democracy, but they also have this pattern of like, we're going to separate because as nations we don't mix, which is kind of like hypocritical, because the nations they created elsewhere in the world, like one really didn't really like took into considerations like the nations and tribes, and in the way like the maps were made. But they have like countries continue to separate, and we even like we're having the question of what of Macedonia, and what of East Ukraine, and what of Czechia and Slovakia, and what of Scotland even, and what of Ireland and Northern Ireland, because like there is this deeply rooted pattern that in nations we just can't live together. And up until like the end of the 20th century, it led to war and terrorism, even in Europe. And so like we're gonna have to take a very hard look at ourselves and really ask ourselves like, right, so we're having our separations. Is it doing any good for us? You know, and why even are we trying to draw lines and borders on our maps? And wasn't it like the whole of our Cold War problem, like separating people with like walls, you know. So yeah, I saw that Nikki posted something. Does someone want to read that?
So I'll read Nikki's comment now, but I want to talk to this tribal component that you mentioned that we probably have been overlooking for a little bit. And we need to remember the history of people and the history of humanity, in that tribes were formed to keep each other safe. But the consequence of that keeping each other safe was a real consequence to non-conformity, where you were then ostracized. And that is what has fueled a generational trauma of abandonment. And it's something that's probably playing, that trauma, that abandonment trauma is playing out in these political games, so that there's a call being made to be with your own, with similar. And what happens with tribes is that they thrive at the expense of each other because they're not quite good at sharing with each other. So we, you know, once the tribes are in conflict, we want the bigger watering hole. We want the healthier animals. So what is it, you know, what is it fueling? It's fueling an underlying energy of conflict, that, or competition that fuels conflict, because they were always competing with each other for resources. And now you're seeing all these nations trying to separate components very much into what could be described as modern day tribes. And that is why you're seeing these components of conflict surfacing so very clearly and so very powerfully in the political agenda of countries at the moment. So we mustn't lose sight of the fact that tribalism was a thing, and it probably still is a thing in the mindset. It's literally probably going back to man's animal brain kind of thing. You know, as much as they've evolved, they haven't really evolved kind of thing. So we need to be clear that that tribalism is playing out on a world stage in a very different way, but it's in essence fueling the amount of conflict that we're seeing in the world right now. Okay, then just to Nikki's comment, she said, just wanted to say the dialogues between Serbia and Kosovo led by the EU are for regulation of their relations of the two countries. They need to succeed and progress as a way to move forward in getting in the EU. So my question is, why would Serbia doubt and go against NATO? Is their intention to get in the EU, or in the region, Serbia is seen as not stable and confusing because of Russia? Interesting question.
Yeah. I don't know. Our whole discussion felt like they just decided to side with Russia on this one and kind of abandon the idea of European Union. Feels like it's on the back burner at the moment for most countries who wanted like a few years ago to go into the European Union, but I'm not sure because I don't know what their intent is there.
It's interesting. Yeah, it feels like Serbia. I feel like Serbia, the government is still like testing the waters to see if that could work out, because like, you know, because they're not quite definite on what they're doing yet, but it definitely sounds like they are testing moving away from that and moving away from like integration with Europe, the rest of Europe. Yeah.
But also, if they have the support of Russia, it could very easily mean that they have military support and military power that makes it much more complicated and much more difficult for NATO to do its job of peacekeeping in that territory. So you know, there's many elements at play, but it literally feels like a game of chess. You know, literally, because those chess pieces are only able to move in certain directions and at certain paces. And so this feels very much like a game of chess, like what checkmate are we actually working towards here?
And you know, like maybe they're playing as opportunists and in very pragmatic ways. Like some people, for example, if they support like a full football club, they will support a football club for their whole life. And some people, they want to support whoever wins.
Yes.
And so if they're seeing Russia as a winner right now, and they're in that pragmatic sort of state of mind, because I think some of their leaders have been in that strategy in the Cold War as well. So that might be a political pattern. If they value this pragmatism, why wouldn't they side with who they think is the winner right now? You know,
But not only siding with who they think is the winner right now, the fact that for a very intrinsic part, Russia is actually unchallenged. And that's why they're not making a move to end this conflict. Rather, they are making more demands in order to consider ending the conflict. It's kind of the aggressor is being appeased so that they don't hurt more people, as opposed to saying, stop your aggressive shit. We're saying, take this and calm down. Take that and calm down. You know, and it's literally that the behavior of the unstable family member, everybody's tiptoeing around to keep the peace, as opposed to addressing the problem.
What do you mean when you're saying Russia is unopposed?
Well, for the most part, the sanctions don't seem to be having the effect that is needed to have.
they're pushing their points without
Yes.
having opposition.
Yeah.
Yes. So what I'm saying is the aggressor is asking for appeasement in order to stop their aggression. And so from the outside, if that's your MO, if that's the way you operate, and you're seeing Russia winning in that space by being appeased or asking for appeasement, why wouldn't you also try it?
Yeah. And if it's seen as a way of like getting around having to like negotiate with Kosovo, you know, because like that's tricky for Serbia, probably for the internal politics of Serbia as well, you know, because there might be some of the population who say like no negotiation with Kosovo, like, you know, fuck them, you know, and then there might be some who say no, we're open to it, but you know, it depends, right, probably on the internal politics of Serbia and their ability to how they feel about like whether they'd be supported in having conflict or even trying to do conquest in the region. You know, I'm not, because I feel like it would be difficult for Serbia to be like a pariah in Europe, like surrounded by the European Union, and they're the only ones who are kind of opposing the world order in the Balkans. Oh, meanwhile, their ally Russia's like way over there. That sounds difficult, you know. I just want to mention that.
Yep, cool. So yeah, thank you everybody. We are at our hours, so thank you for the conversation. Thank you to everybody that's joined us today and shared their comments and thoughts with us. And thank you to Nikki for that fun question. I suppose it's something that we would need to explore as we go along and just keep an eye on what this means at a world level for the shift in terms of what's required to actually ever manage the world at this point in time. Also, to everybody that's liked and subscribed and followed our comments, please follow, like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous conversations. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.